It was frightening. I think everybody in the room was very apprehensive. Okay, those aren't the words of some Hollywood screenwriter trying to build suspense for a sci-fi thriller. That is a direct, on-the-record quote from Albert Chop. He was a Pentagon spokesman, and he was describing the actual mood deep inside military command during the summer of 1952. Just imagine the sheer terror inside the most heavily defended airspace on the planet as completely unexplained objects just hovered right over the White House and the U.S. Capitol, vanishing and reappearing totally at will. So, welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into a genuinely pivotal, defining year in modern history, 1952. This is the year the idea of the unidentified flying object completely transformed. It went from being this weird, fringe curiosity to a genuine, hair-raising national security crisis all over the globe. We're going to look strictly at the historical record today. We're breaking down the declassified files, the pilot testimonies, and the actual military logs to understand exactly how the world's most powerful governments reacted when our skies suddenly got very, very crowded with the unknown.
Section 1. The Washington D.C. Flak. So this is where the whole phenomenon totally exploded into public view and created an absolute media frenzy. Think about how rapidly this wave of hysteria escalated over just 10 days in July. It all kicks off late on July 19th when air traffic controllers suddenly start tracking these incredibly fast radar blips near Andrews Air Force Base. Literally the very next day, a commercial pilot, Captain Pierman, spots them with his own eyes. By July 26th, the situation is so intense that the Air Force actually scrambles jet fighters from Delaware to intercept these things. But here's the crazy part. Every single time the jets closed in, the objects just vanished. Poof, gone, only to reappear the second the jets backed off. It was such a massive crisis that by July 29th, Major General Samford had to hold a gigantic Pentagon press conference just to try and calm the nation down.
Now, to really ground this abstract radar data in reality, we have to listen to the highly trained pilots who saw these things up close. Captain S.C. Casey Pierman was waiting for takeoff when he saw a bright light. Once he was airborne and heading toward Detroit, ground control actually asked him to follow the radar blips. He reported seeing as many as 7 bluish-white lights moving, in his words, like falling stars without tails. And you have to understand, these weren't just some vague, fuzzy shadows. These were distinct, brightly lit objects moving at absolutely astonishing speeds, reported by a super credible, experienced observer.
Section 2. Britain's Secret Saucer Sightings. While Washington is in full-blown panic mode, a totally parallel crisis was quietly brewing right across the ocean. The UK military was tracking their own highly credible encounters. It actually started with a stunning daytime sighting by a test pilot at Farnborough in 1950. Then, keeping pace with that crazy American summer flap, there were 2 massive events in the autumn of 1952. You got the RAF Topcliffe sighting in September, which happened right in the middle of a major NATO exercise, and then the Little Rissington jet encounter in October. The British military was dealing with the exact same impossible physics that were freaking out Washington.
What's absolutely crucial here is the vivid, sensory detail captured in these secret reports. Take Stan Hubbard, for example. He was a very experienced test pilot at Farnborough. He didn't just see a weird dot in the sky. He reported a 100-foot disk moving between 500 and 900 miles per hour. He specifically noted it had this mother-of-pearl color, and he could actually hear a heavy, dominant humming and crackling sound. And get this, most incredibly, he reported a strong smell of ozone as the thing passed by. I mean, that is a visceral, close-range physical encounter, and it directly triggered a very hush-hush investigation by the Ministry of Defense's Flying Saucer Working Party.
Of course, despite the military's best efforts to keep all this quiet, the sheer scale of the sightings meant leaks were completely inevitable. During Operation Mainbrace, which was that massive NATO exercise in September 1952, multiple Shackleton aircrew members at RAF Topcliffe witnessed a circular silver object. They watched it hover, descend like a falling leaf, and then just accelerate away at a speed that defied belief. And as you can imagine, a spectacular sighting like that leaked straight into the public press, making front-page headlines.
But behind that newspaper hype was a stark reality. We actually have the declassified Air Ministry telegram that detailed the Topcliffe incident. When you read it, you can just feel the urgency in the military documentation. It records the object as silver and circular, with an acceleration in excess of that of a shooting star. This piece of paper is visceral, undeniable historical proof of exactly how seriously these unexplainable, hyper-fast objects were being taken by the top brass when the doors were closed.
Plus, there's this absolutely incredible document from the archives. You see, most pre-1962 UFO records in the UK were routinely shredded, but the operations record book from RAF Little Rissington somehow survived. It logs an event from October 1952 where an instructor and his student flying in a Meteor jet cited 3 saucer-shaped objects at 35,000 feet. The pilot was reportedly so terrified that when he landed, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. The log confirms that ground radar picked the objects up, and fighter jets were scrambled to intercept targets moving at 600 knots. Targets they literally could never catch. So with fighter jets being outmaneuvered all over the globe, the anxiety started reaching the very pinnacle of world power.
Section 3. High-level government alarm.
What does all this stuff about flying saucers amount to? What can it mean? What is the truth? Just take a second to process the immense weight behind those exact words. This isn't some curious journalist asking questions. This is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Winston Churchill himself, demanding answers from his Secretary of State for Air.
We actually have his declassified personal minute memo. And look at the date, July 28, 1952. It was dispatched right smack in the middle of the Washington, D.C. UFO Flap. It serves as undeniable proof that the UFO mystery had pierced the absolute highest levels of global leadership. This phenomenon was no longer something that the people running the world could just ignore.
So what happens next is this absolutely fascinating kind of split-screen reality in how governments responded. On one hand, you had this desperate need for public reassurance. Over in the US, General Samford is up there telling the press that the DC sightings were just temperature anomalies. Nothing to see here, right? But behind the scenes, total secret action. The CIA is forming panels because they're terrified the Soviet Union might use the public panic to their advantage. Prime ministers are firing off urgent memos. Pilot reports are being systematically destroyed or buried. Basically, they were trying to pacify a Cold War public while desperately scrambling for the real answers in the dark.
Section 4. Debunking the panic.
Driven by this frantic need to get the narrative under control, the military pivoted hard to science to explain away the panic. The U.S. Air Force's main weapon for debunking the Washington Flap was this concept called a temperature inversion. They went to the press and explained that a layer of hot air in the sky was essentially bending radar beams, which caused the radar to mistake a natural, completely invisible weather event for solid flying objects. And honestly, it was a really neat scientific explanation that the media totally ate up. It effectively put a lid on the immediate terror of objects hovering over the White House.
Meanwhile, over in the UK, the military was tackling their own mysterious radar blips, which they called angels. Now, to prove that these angels were just flocks of migrating birds, they went to some incredibly morbid lengths. I'm not kidding. They actually got dead birds from sanctuaries, wrapped them in cellophane, whirled them around in the air, and bounced radar off them to measure their echoing area. They took that data, compared it against hits on their powerful Type 80 radars, and eventually concluded, yep, many radar angels were indeed just migrating birds.
But, when we actually put the evidence side by side, there is a pretty massive gap. On one side, we have highly trained, expert military observers detailing metallic disks, mother-of-pearl surfaces, the smell of ozone, and objects pulling off unbelievable acceleration. On the other side, the official explanations, hot air layers, migratory birds, and optical illusions. I mean, we have to ask ourselves, can a flock of birds wrap itself in a metallic sheen and outrun a scrambled jet fighter? Can a temperature inversion create a loud humming noise and a distinct ozone smell? The official explanations just simply do not map onto the visceral, sensory data those pilots reported.
Now, over the years, military radar technology definitely improved. Engineers literally built systems specifically to tune out the noise and the clutter of birds and weather anomalies. And interestingly enough, once they did that, reports of UFOs on radar dropped significantly. But I think that leaves us with a really powerful question to consider. Did the military actually successfully tune out natural anomalies, proving there was nothing extraordinary up there to begin with? Or, by setting their instruments to completely ignore anything that didn't behave exactly like a conventional aircraft, did they simply figure out how to hide the unexplainable from their own screens? Well, that wraps up this explainer. Keep questioning the official narrative, and always keep looking up.